In previous videos, I presented undeniable evidence of life after death and discussed where we go after we pass. I also explained the true nature of dreams and highlighted the tragic consequences faced by those who commit suicide even after their death. Additionally, I shared some of the many NDE stories I've gathered over more than 20 years of studying the phenomenon of death in life beyond the physical body. If you haven't seen those videos yet, I encourage you to click on my channel's name and the Videos tab, where you'll find all the content I've created so far. In this episode, I will address the topic of wealth and attempt to answer the question, does wealth truly stand as an obstacle on the path to liberation after death? Let's begin. Living in luxury and possessing wealth have been subjects of controversy for centuries, especially in spiritual and religious contexts. In many religious and philosophical traditions, wealth is seen as an obstacle on the path to spiritual growth. One famous example is the biblical saying, "It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven." Matthew 19:24. Similarly, in some Eastern philosophies, such as Buddhism and Hinduism, emphasis is placed on karma and reincarnation, where wealth and attachment to material goods can lead to negative consequences in future lives. As I mentioned in previous videos and in my publication, the goal of beings here who have become saturated with suffering is to leave the world of suffering and return to the true home. But does living in luxury really have to be an obstacle on this path? Everything depends on what wealth means to us and how we use it. Wealth does not have to be negative in a spiritual context as long as it is not a source of attachment and dependency. If a person can use material goods responsibly without becoming overly attached to them, the path to liberation after death remains open. Possessing wealth is not only about comfort, it also comes with responsibility. A wealthy person has greater opportunities to do good. They can help others, support charitable activities, and engage in social projects. They also have significantly more time to acquire valuable knowledge about the surrounding reality and to cultivate various practices that develop consciousness. In this way, wealth becomes a tool that, if used wisely and altruistically, can contribute to spiritual growth rather than hinder it. Unfortunately, wealth can also have a dark side. Wealth and power often break the moral backbone of those who become enslaved by them. This can lead to enormous harm, which such individuals can inflict not only on others, but also on themselves. With a high probability, addiction to wealth will also cause one to remain in the world of suffering for subsequent incarnations. History provides examples of wealthy individuals who, despite their riches, were not blinded by them. For example, Elizabeth of Hungary, despite being a princess, dedicated her wealth to the poor and the sick, and her life became, in the eyes of many, a model of compassion. Thus, it is possible to see that wealth can be an opportunity rather than just an obstacle. Similarly, in Buddhism, some bodhisattvas were kings or wealthy people who used their resources to help others reach enlightenment. According to the principles of karma and reincarnation, every action we take has consequences that affect our future incarnations. A life of luxury, if it is the result of good karma from previous lives, does not have to be something negative. The principle of karmic balance suggests that wealth is a form of reward for good deeds from past lives. However, if wealth becomes a source of attachment and leads to greed, egoism, and a lack of empathy, then the resources of good karma may run out, and in the next life, the soul may be born into poverty and suffering. Thus, the key is how one approaches their wealth. If luxury and abundance do not become ends in themselves, but rather serve as tools for spiritual development and helping others, there is no obstacle to achieving liberation from the cycle of reincarnation after death. Possessing material goods does not determine the ultimate fate of the soul. It is attachment and the way wealth is managed that are the crucial factors. In some spiritual traditions, especially in Eastern philosophies, wealth is seen as a form of illusion, in Sanskrit known as Maya. According to this perspective, material goods can distract a person from the true purpose of life, which is spiritual growth and the pursuit of enlightenment. However, the problem is not the material goods themselves, but how one perceives and uses them. If wealth is treated as something transient and insignificant from the ultimate goal's perspective, negative consequences can be avoided. In this way, wealth does not hinder the path to liberation because the person is not attached to it. As one Buddhist teaching states, everything that exists is transient, and the only enduring goal is enlightenment. Using my terminology, the only lasting goal is to return to the true home after death. If wealth is not seen as an absolute value, but as a tool that can be used for good purposes, it does not negatively impact the soul's fate. However, when wealth becomes addictive and one treats it as the most important goal in life, problems arise. Attachment to material goods and the desire to accumulate them can lead to karmic imbalance. A person who cannot detach from material things may find themselves once again in the cycle of samsara, reincarnation, after death, as their soul has not reached an adequate level of spiritual understanding. If the resources of good karma are exhausted in one affluent life, a person may be condemned to poverty in future incarnations. The law of karmic balance assumes that every abuse, especially one stemming from egoism and greed, must be balanced by experiencing adversity. Thus, wealth that was a source of addiction can become the cause of suffering in a future life. Yet, even in this context, there is hope. If a person can understand during their wealthy life that material goods are only tools, not the end goal, and they acquire appropriate knowledge, they can free themselves from the cycle of rebirths. Spiritual awareness allows a person to let go of attachment, leading to liberation and avoiding further incarnation in conditions of suffering. The crucial factor that determines whether wealth will be an obstacle on the spiritual path is a person's inner freedom. If one is free from attachment to wealth, their fortune does not negatively affect their soul. Possessing material goods is neither a sin nor an obstacle if one can maintain the proper perspective. Maintaining inner freedom means being willing to give up wealth if necessary and not tying one's sense of self-worth to material possessions. Such an attitude ensures that even while living in luxury, one remains spiritually pure and ready for further development. Based on the above reflections, one can conclude that living in luxury and possessing wealth does not have to be negative in the context of avoiding reincarnation and returning to the true home. The key lies in whether wealth becomes a source of attachment and dependency or is treated as a tool that can be used in the service of others. If one can maintain inner freedom and does not base their self-worth on material goods, spiritual growth is not hindered by wealth. In this way, one can lead an affluent life while avoiding reincarnation and guiding the soul toward liberation. As I mentioned, besides living free from attachments, it is also important to acquire proper knowledge about the reality around us. Without it, it is easy to get lost in non-material worlds after death. One might also unknowingly succumb to the influence and manipulations of various beings who wish to keep us in the cycle of successive lives. You can find this knowledge in my publication based on over 20 years of research into life after physical death and my personal experiences. A link to it is provided in the description below the video. And that's all for today. Thank you for being here, and see you next time.